We're going to talk about humidity, relative humidity, and the effects that it has on your guitar, and how do you know how much humidity to use. So, a lot of standard things, a lot of things you read. Keep your guitar between certain range of humidity, 40 to 50%, 40 to 60%, 35 to 40%. You know, everybody's got this range of humidity here. There's some reasons for it, and I have up here, it's stuck on there, but I have a humidity gauge right up here, a hygrometer, humidity gauge. I have another hygrometer right here, a GoV, and I like this one because it's Wi-Fi. So when I'm not here to look at this one, I can check in by Wi-Fi on that one. But what I'm getting at here is what you really need to do is you need to learn to read your guitar so that you can tell whether or not you have too much humidity or too little humidity. A number is just a number. And some guitars react differently from other guitars. Guitars that have been exposed to high humidity for a long period of time will require that high humidity, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Guitars that have been exposed to low humidity for a long time can be damaged if all of a sudden they hit high humidity. And high and low are completely relative to the instrument. So, when I send the guitar back to customers, lately, I've been having a little bit of trouble with the actions changing dramatically. And you know, I've done this for 25 years and I haven't had any issue until I moved from where I was, which was 6,500 feet elevation, and it was a drier, probably more stable environment, but it was 6,500 feet. I shipped guitars for 20 years, and I rarely had an issue. I moved up to Angel Fire, which is 8,500 feet elevation, and here at Los Alamos, which is 7,500 feet elevation. All of a sudden, I have problems with guitars changing. And, you know, it's crazy. I went off to New York, and I got it back. Well, we talked about it a lot, and he had really good measurements, and I said, okay, you know, your actions changed. I mean, you know, you've got a picture of it for me. I get the guitar back, leave it in the box for a day or two, you know, till I got around to opening it. I open it up, and it's exactly where it was when I sent it. I have the spec sheet. Well, I mean, it changed. So it changed between shipping back and forth, and rather dramatically, too, not just a couple thousandths of an inch. So I've been sending out a sheet to customers on how to check your guitar when it comes in. And so we're kind of going to go over a few of those things today. And we're going to use this D28 1941 Authentic, which has been in many of my videos. And the great thing about this guitar is that it's changed. It's changed rather dramatically. So in all of the videos that I've been doing up to now, this guitar has had an action at the 12th fret of about 90 thousandths of an inch. Very comfortable, you know, super comfortable action. 90 thousandths of an inch at the 12th fret. So I pull it out of the case to bring it up here, and I look at that action. Holy cow! I bet that action's 125 now. Let me throw it up here just to see. So this is step one. And that is know your action. And I don't care if you use feeler gauges, I don't care if you use whatever. A really good way to check your action, or at least have something to compare it with, stack of coins here. Here's 2 nickels, you know. So in fact, I can just do this right here. Everybody has change. You can use nickels, pennies, dimes, they're all different thicknesses. And stick them up under here into the 12th fret and just get an idea. So it's not quite 2 nickels, which I know would be 120 thousandths of an inch because I use these for setting up Telecaster pickups. Use something that you have a consistent gauge, 145. So at least when I had 145 thousandths of an inch. A feeler gauge is really, honestly, man, They're less than $10 from any auto parts store, Walmart, Dollar General, Love's Truck Stop. There are so many places you can get feeler gauges, and they're just automotive feeler gauges. I have a whole video on how to set up feeler gauges, because there's a couple little tricks. You don't need all the gauges, you know. They'll come in 1/1000th of an inch. You don't need that. You need like every 2, so that you have even numbers and they're easy to add in your head. But feeler gauges are so nice. So the first thing you need to know is know your action. So when you get a guitar back from me, or when you get a guitar in from a purchase or something like that, it's just a really good idea to measure the action, write it down on something, and keep track of it. And then you know whether or not this has changed. And I don't care how accurate you are, as long as you're pretty accurate. And I've been to Winfield, Kansas, flat picking championship many, many times. And you're there, you know, for the whole week of jamming. And about day 3 or 4, I should always start thinking, man, my action's getting high. So I can whip out my feeler gauges and I can measure it. 9 times out of 10, the action's right where it was, and what's happening is my hand's getting tired. But being able to measure it gives me confidence that nothing's changed. So in this guitar, there we go, finally, it's gone from 90,000ths of an inch to 120, 122. So that's a lot. That's 30,000ths of an inch of change, which right now it's unplayable. Right now it's way too high for me to play. So the question is this, is why did the action change? I know it's higher. Why did it change from 90,000ths of an inch up suddenly? Well, I've been humidifying it. Because I've been gone a lot, and this guitar's been sitting in the case, and so I would humidify it, and I don't want it to get dry, so I probably over-humidified it. So why do I think maybe that I over-humidified it? Here's how we can check for whether you're over-humidified or under-humidified. First thing I'm going to do, again, and I know the guitar because I've had it 2 years now, it's been great. So the first thing you want to do, you have a high action, and your question is, why do I have a high action? Well, is there anything loose, you know? Look at the heel right here and hold it up to the light and see if the heel might be loose. Because if the heel's loose, then the neck's going to come forward, you're going to have a high action. And that can happen, and that can happen fairly suddenly sometimes. No, the heel's tight on this, as I suspected it would be. So the next thing you know, well, the nut relief, the nut didn't change, because the nut and then the first fret, that's set. But verify it. Okay, this is, you also should do this as soon as your guitar comes in, is hold the string down, 2nd fret, 3rd fret. Hold the string down between the 2nd and 3rd fret, so you're really fretting the 3rd fret, and check at the 1st fret. And you should have the tiniest bit of clearance, and I mean tiny. I can just barely see air here. And if you listen to it tap, it's barely, I bet it's not even 1/1000th of an inch. It doesn't matter. I mean, when I say barely, I mean absolutely barely. Here is 0.0025. And that won't go. That won't go, but I can still see light. So this nut is good. Same thing over here. Just an absolute sliver of movement. Okay, but they're all clear in the 1st fret. So I know the problem's not the nut. This nut is actually perfect. So the next thing to do, what's the relief look like? Because what happens with excess humidity, and it takes quite a bit of humidity to do this, with excess humidity, your fingerboard will swell. When the fingerboard swells, it goes back like this. And when it goes back like this, you get a back bow, and that also drops the action significantly. Now, my action has gone up in this case, but you need to look at it and see what your relief is, just to verify these things. And I have some relief. All I need is some, and I don't want a lot of relief in this case. And so I want you to check these things, check your nut, check your relief, and check your action as soon as you get your guitar in. And that way you have your baseline so that if anything moves later on, we know what moved. Okay? So let me say that again. You want to look at your guitar when it first comes in, and you've inspected it, you've improved it, you've approved it, and everything's great. Check the nut slots, check the relief, check the action. Write those things down there on my spec sheet when they come to you. Verify them. So that later on, if something moves, especially if something moves suddenly, you can have an idea what the problem is. So in this case, I have verified that my nut slots are great, my relief is great. Those things are not the problem. So I still have a high action. Here's what I suspect, is that because I put a sponge in the body here, I over-humidified the guitar. In fact, feel this? There's rust on the strings. So, too much humidity is what my guess is. The way to check for humidity in a top is to look at the top like this. Hold it in the light and tilt it back and forth. And look at the grain on that top. If the grain is rippled, and you can see a corduroy look on this top grain, then your guitar is dry. Now, if your guitar is dry, or another way, let me say this again. Your action can go up if the guitar is dry or if it's wet. And your action can go down if the guitar is dry or if it's wet. Two different things happen here, so we'll get to that. Let me remember to do that in a minute, okay? But we're going to look at the top first. This top is very, very, very smooth. It also looks bowed. I can see a distinct bow in this top. It's a bulge. It's not a belly. You know, a belly would be boom like this. It's not that. It's a distinct arch in the top. So I'm suspicious of this. I'm going to come and look at the back here. And the back also looks arched more than it really should be. So just running my hands over the guitar, look at that. Can you hear this? You know what I feel? I feel the zipper stripe right here. I feel that zipper stripe. And as I look at this really close, I can see that the lacquer on the back is fractured a little bit. What that tells me is that the guitar is over-humidified, and when it's over-humidified, it bellies and buckles. That buckling is going to cause that lacquer in here to break because it's coming up like this. Instead of being down like this, down nice and tight, it's bulged up like a bridge. What do they call it? A drawbridge. A drawbridge. So it's actually buckled up a little bit, and then you can feel the lacquer in there. I'm not real concerned about that because as it dries out, it'll shrink back in, and you won't be able to feel that. And that happens. You know, that happens with age. Guitars get humidified, over-humidified, they get under-humidified. That's a part of aging. But I can feel that. And I'm a little suspicious of that because I've never felt that before. I'm also going to feel the binding here on the edges just to see if anything's popping loose. Because the same thing will happen here. If the guitar is over-humidified, the sides will bulge a little bit. And you may notice that your guitar is a little bit harder to get out of the case. And I had this happen to a mandolin one time that was in a Carlton case, and I accidentally over-humidified it, and I literally almost could not get that mandolin out of the case because Carlton cases fit really tight, and I thought I was over-humidified. You know, it's swollen up so much. So looking at this, the sides don't look too bad. Now, here's what we need to do to check all this stuff. We need to get ourselves a straight edge. A wooden yardstick is fine. An actual level is really good because it's a little bit wider. And lay it across like this and see. See what it looks like. See if it clears the sides. This one looks pretty flat too, so it's not terribly humidified. But do the same thing right here behind the bridge. Lay your straight edge behind the bridge. And look at the gap on the edges and balance this thing out. And this guitar has more than 1/8 of an inch of gap, and I would say it's getting close to 1/4 of an inch of gap, which is too much. So all of these things here are pointing to this high action, the super smooth feel across the top here, and this round dome on the top. And really, everything in this guitar is pointing to me being over-humidified, especially since I know this guitar, and it wasn't like this before. I've done this before in other videos, and it just barely touches the edge there. So you can also look at the shape of the belly here, and let's see if I can get this on the camera and balance everything. Try to do this without 3 hands. Let's get this up here. And look at the shape, and I get a shadow on this. It really helps. And what I see is that the top is highest right here in the center, and then completely drops away into a nice smooth arc right here to leave a gap on the edges here. So what we have is a top that is curved, like this. It's curved, so that the highest point is right here, and that's what happens when you over-humidify. The thing goes like this, and it bulges, like this. So your wood cells take in humidity, and as they get humid, the wood cells swell. They swell clear across the top of the guitar, and when they swell, they've only got one place to go, and that's up. When they get dry, the opposite happens, and they shrink. And when they shrink, they can only go so far before they don't have any more room to shrink, and that's why you get cracks. Because they've shrunk, and they've shrunk as much as they can. The box is holding them. You see there's a box right here, and it's holding that wood out here, and it's trying to shrink, and it can't, and pow, you get a crack. You see that humidity? I'm going to show you that corduroy as a lack of humidity. That's literally the cells drying out. When you see that super smooth, that's the cells all puffed up with water. Now, the danger of over-humidifying is that once those cells are puffed up, they've got a box here, and they've only got so much room. They've got a curve here, and the cells actually get compressed a little bit. So a guitar that has been over-humidified is going to be more susceptible in the future to drying out. This one's not so bad. It'll be fine after it dries out for a little bit. But what I'm talking about is during Hurricane Katrina, I got a couple guitars in that had literally been floating around in the water. So that was as much humidity as you could possibly give a guitar. When I got them in, they looked like they'd been living in the Sahara Desert for years. They were so sunken in. The top was just caved in. The sides were just caved in. Everything was just sunk and shrunk. So I asked Mario Pru about that, because I said, this is curious. I expected it to be swollen. And he said, no, because the cells got compressed, and now they're smaller than they were when the guitar was put together. So now you have a smaller top, smaller back and sides. Everything is smaller, and that's why they're shrunken in. You're trying to fit it all, these smaller pieces back in here through a box. It makes a lot of sense. Now, so that guitar, those 2 guitars that I did, they have to have a lot of humidity. They have to have more humidity than they normally would, because they were over-humidified, the cells are smaller, and now you have basically a very dry guitar. That's what I'm talking about learning to read the guitar, and why the humidity is relative to the instrument. So those guitars that were over-humidified are now going to have to stay humidified. Likewise, a guitar that is dry and has managed to survive for years, like the 1934 D28 that came in. I very seriously doubt if for the first 50 years of its life anybody cared about humidity. They didn't even know about humidity. It's a working man's guitar, and nobody humidified that thing. It just got its natural humidity with the rise and fall of the seasons, and yeah, the action probably went up and down, and eventually it stabilized, and amazingly it didn't have any cracks, and that's probably because when it was built, the building humidity more or less matched the natural humidity. So it wasn't built at an extremely humid time or an extremely dry time. It was built at some middle ground time. And it survived, you know. So it would be a mistake to start keeping that guitar at 60% humidity constantly. The best thing to do is just leave it alone, in the environment that it's been in. And so if you started to see signs of over-humidifying on that guitar, back off. Learn to read the guitar and know what humidity it likes and keep it right around that range. So if the guitar has survived being 28% right now in the shop because I have the humidifier turned off, so it's fairly dry in here. Don't want to dry this guitar out too fast, but if it stays in here and then it's stable and everything looks good, then it should be a mistake to humidify this guitar up to 70 or 80%. You're going to see some problems, and you're going to see the same kind of problems that you will see if you under-humidify a guitar. So if you take a guitar that's used to being in a very humid environment and you suddenly drop it into a very dry environment, you're going to see signs of drying out. And you would need to humidify it back up and then kind of slowly drop it. And it may need to always be at that humidity. Point is the number of humidity is just relative to that guitar. Most people will tell you 40 to 50% because it's an average. And so it means that this guitar, if this guitar likes 30, then 50 is a little high for it, but it'll survive. And if this guitar likes 70, 50 is a little bit low for it, but it'll survive. So 50 is just a middle of the line number. If I kept this guitar at 50% humidity and the top stays like this, I'm going to have to reset the neck, which is no big deal. You know, just reset the neck to it. But then it's going to have to always stay at that humidity or the action is going to go down again, and now I'm going to have an over-tall saddle, you see? So, you got to really think about these things, and it's just not a cookbook. Learn to read your guitar. When your guitar comes in, and you have a new guitar, the very first thing you should do with any new guitar, whether it's one that I've worked on for you, it's got a neck reset, it's coming back from somewhere, it is actually a brand new guitar, I strongly advise you to check your nut, slot, hides, check your relief, check your 12th fret action. Take a quick look at the back over here. Just lay a straight edge across there and take a look at it. And make a note. Looks like it clears by 1/4 of an inch, you know? Take a picture of it. Make a reference point somehow so that if you have an issue later on and your action changes dramatically one way or another, you can come back and you can recheck these things and you can see what changed, because something changed, and it's not just magic, and it's not feelings, and it's nothing like that. It's some sort of mechanical thing changed. One last really good measurement sometimes is to run your straight edge this way and look at the kind of S-curve right here in the top. The reason you need a neck reset is not because the neck changed. The neck doesn't bow up or down really dramatically enough to cause that. Your relief will change a little bit, but not as much as the other factors. What generally happens is the guitar collapses right here at the waist. There's a sound hole right here. This curve right here makes the top more susceptible to collapsing. So you have a big sound hole. Acoustic guitars tend to collapse right across the waist here. So lay a straight edge across there and look at that kind of curve that you see here. And we see some here, and you got a belly, you got a belly here. We've already just demonstrated that. You got a belly here. This isn't going to move the same because there's bracing right here. The upper bat is completely different. So there is going to be an S-curve like this. But you want to see how much of an S-curve there is. And in this case, it's like maybe a 32nd of an inch. I could easily get my feeler gauges and stick them in here and actually measure that. But it's less of a dip right now that I would expect to see in a guitar of this age and of this build. So again, what's happened is the humidity has made this whole thing swell up, and that's why my action is high, because it's over-humidified. Fairly certain about that. So what will I do? Well, I'll leave it out in the air for a little bit and let it dry out a little bit. Now, like I said over here, 28%. Well, that's 30%, okay? Your hygrometer is only so high. 30% is just a little bit dry, but it's not too terrible. And again, I'm going to watch the guitar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it out in the air. I'm going to turn the humidifier back on in a minute to get it about 35%. And I'm going to leave this thing out for about a week. in the air. And being out in the air is different. It's a different kind of humidity than being trapped into a case, which is where it's been trapped. So, and we'll take another look at this guitar in about a week and see what's happened to it. I'm going to save this video. We're going to come back in about a week and we're going to see what this guitar looks like then. So, but again, what we're doing here, learn to read the guitar. Don't just follow a blind humidity standard. 50% is given to you once again because it's an average, and so you're probably going to hit something. But your guitar might be better off if it's just a little bit drier. Might be better off if it's just a little bit wetter. 60%, 40%. You know, people panic. Oh, I kept it at 50% steady. Well, you know, I'll tell you one thing. This is a dangerous game sometimes. But that mandolin, that was hard to get out of the case because it was over-humidified. I actually ran that mandolin on a tone right, you know, with the thing that vibrates it, for about a week. And I compared it with a mandolin where I did not do that. I compared it with the standard. And after about a week of that, I didn't like the way it was going. It was getting vague, would be a good term. It was losing its bite, you know. And I just didn't like the way it was going. So I took it off the tone right. Quit using that. And then probably about a year later is when I over-humidified that mandolin. I took it out, man, the action's sky high. And I thought, oh man, it's going to neck reset. And then I thought, no, it's over-humidified, you know. So I hung it up on the wall in the office. And a week later, the action had gone down. That thing sounded phenomenal. It sounded so much better. Again, I compared it to a standard mandolin where nothing had changed. It was amazing. It sounded open, crisp, woody, and it was responsive. That was, you know, those were all the things. The response was the big thing. It was just like, man, this mandolin is just, you barely touch it, it just rings. It was Kentucky KM1000 mandolin, not an expensive mandolin. The difference you change between over-humidifying it and then drying it out again was pretty dramatic. So I've been paying attention to that guitars too, and I have found to be a fairly accurate statement is if they get over-humidified and then dried out a little bit more, they tend to really open up. I suspect that's a lot of what opening up has to do in these older guitars is they've been humidified, they've been dried, they've been cold, they've been hot, and it's a dangerous game to play because that's how you crack guitars and that's how you cause damage. But if the guitar does survive that, I really think that's what causes those old guitars to sound good, is having gone through a variety of conditions like that. So we will see. And I'm going to watch this guitar, obviously, and I'm going to see if anything's happening right here. And I'm going to watch for the corduroy. I will watch the center seam very carefully here to make sure it's not separating and opening up or anything like that. That would indicate way too much dryness happening. And I don't think it's going to do that. It's not. It's just slightly over-humidified. Not a big deal. So, and it sounds muffled, but I'm playing it here. I compared it to the D21 in there, and it sounded really muffled. It didn't sound as good as it normally does, and so that's another sign of excess humidity. Your guitar sounds damp, for lack of a better word. Sounds muffled, soggy. You know, those are all words that you would use. It just doesn't have the crispness that it would have. So, learn to read your guitar. Here's an update on our patient. It's been 3 days now. It's been sitting out at about 35% humidity. It gets down a little bit during the day. It gets down to about 30 during the day. Comes back up in the evening because I run a humidifier in the room in the evening, so it gets up about 40. So it's been going back and forth between 30 and 40. And let's take a look at our action. First of all, because that's the thing we were looking at. So I'm going to run 96 thousandths of an inch here on the low E. There's 96, barely touching. So we've come down quite a bit since then. Let's see if I can get straight edge on the rear here. And I'm not seeing any corduroy yet. Looking really good on top. So it's definitely not getting too dry, is my point. So let's take a look at this. And we have probably about 1/8 of an inch on each edge here. So the top has definitely come down a little bit, but not too much. It's still clearing, you know. It's not dry yet. So it was definitely wet before. And I have a little bit more dip here. Not too bad again, but a little bit more than I have. So that's to be expected. Everything's looking what I expected it to do. The action's come down. The top is going down slowly, which it should be slowly. And the relief is really good. The relief's not changing much, so most of it's been back here in the belly. And like I said, I'm not seeing it in corridor. I'm definitely not seeing a top split. Anything like that, that'd be dangerous, you know, that'd be a dangerous sign. It looks great right now. And starting to sound a little bit crisper too. Starting to sound crisp again instead of muddy. So I'll give it to the weekend. And you know, I don't want to dry it out and damage anything. But I'm just trying to tell you how to read the guitar. So we're watching for it. We're watching for signs of it getting too dry. It was too wet before, and took all the humidity away from it. 35% is not bad, you know. Once it gets to that, then I'll keep it more around 40 and just that kind of thing. But I over-humidified it because I was gone from the guitar, and it's better to err on the side of caution that way. You know, better to over-humidify it a little bit than under-humidify it. Come back after a week or 2 weeks and find problems. It'd be sitting there for a week, you know, by itself. So during the winter too, when it's not raining and the humidity is different. So, you know, it's fine. I didn't do anything bad. I just over-humidified it a little bit. So we're learning how to read our guitars. So we'll check back in another 2 or 3 days. All right. It's been a week since this guitar has been out of the case. God, it looks an echo. Woo, woo. It's been a week since it's been out of the case and out into the natural air. Humidity in the shop right now is 33%, which is on the low side. But remember, what we're trying to do here is learn to read the guitar so that we know what humidity it likes to live into. So this one's been out, exposed. Humidity's gotten down to 25% during the day for a little bit. And then I get nervous and I turn the humidifier on for a little while. But it ran, the lowest it went was 20%, which is pretty low. I would not be comfortable leaving it at that for a very long time at all. Then at night, I turn the humidifier on, and so it'll get up to about 40%. So at night it's at 40%, during the day it's at less. So, you know, it averages out. But I think as long as you give a guitar some humidity at some point, it can withstand dry periods pretty good. But whole point here, once again, is not to rely on the numbers, but learn to read your guitar. So, having been out for a week, I just checked it a couple days ago, you know, so this is the last check. So the first thing we want to do is we want to take a look at the action. Let's see what the action's done. And here, I've even forgotten where we started at, but we started at 100 and something or another. And here's 90 thousandths of an inch. And we're going to check it, and wow. It's less than, the 90 is not clearing. So it has definitely come down, which is great, because this is what I wanted to see, you know. I wanted the action to come down, because my whole thing, remember from the very beginning, is I thought the guitar would have been over-humidified because I'd had a sponge in here and I'd left it in the case and I was worried about it getting dry. So I deliberately, you know, over-humidified it. Way better to over-humidify a little bit than to leave it under-humidified. So the action's come down, action's great. So that's what we want to know. So let's see what's happened to the neck relief at the same time here. So 1st fret, 12th fret, and the neck relief is still pretty flat. I think it's increased a little bit because the fingerboard shrunk a little bit. But what we've demonstrated here is that the fingerboard is slow to react. the action is reacted, so that means the top is reacted, and there I can feel that distortion across the top. When it was over-humidified, remember I said I had a real smooth top, and I couldn't feel the braces and couldn't feel this hump, and now I can definitely feel this hump right here, which you kind of should a little bit, you know. I'm not going to go any drier than this. This is the 90 thousandths. So the fingerboard is slow to react. This has reacted quite a bit, and remember the back stripe I was talking about? It was rough. It's smooth now, so I know it's shrunk back in, come back in, and I can feel that it's not totally smooth. It's not factory smooth, but it's not nearly as rough as it was when we started. Let's check it. I got a little bit of finish flaking going on here, and that's normal with a vintage guitar. You know, they get that finish that gets chipped and cracked, and part of it's because of all the humidity changes they go into. I'm feeling for the binding, making sure nothing's going. You know, you can actually cause some binding issues by causing it to expand. And so, you know, people say, "Oh, I kept it in proper humidity." Well, you know, maybe you over-humidified a little bit. I've definitely seen binding issues from over-humidified guitars. I can feel the lacquer here. It's not coming apart, but I can definitely feel that. But that's pretty common. And this guitar is 10 years old. Don't forget. That all feels good though. Nothing's coming loose anyways. Action's down. Let's see what the back looks like here. Because that, remember, was one of the things to identify a dry guitar. So now we're going to look and we're going to see. We've seen how this guitar reacts under being dry. Now we're going to look and see what's changed. So the fingerboard didn't change a whole lot. It changed a little bit, but by increasing relief, it actually would increase the action a little bit. The fact that the action's gone down and the relief is increased means that the soundboard has really gone down. So, and I don't think it's really gone down. I mean, I'm just saying it's gone down the most. Most of our changes are probably going to be back here in the soundboard. So let's see what we have here. We lay the straight edge across the top, and it's still clearing the sides. Still clearing the sides here, but not as much as it was. And now, it's about what I would call right. It's clearing all the way across right here, so there's no sinking going on here, because when they get really dry, they will sink and cave in right here, and the straight edge will actually touch the sides. And when they get to that point, they're dry. They are really dry. You need to get some humidity in there right away. But this one's gone down a little bit. I can see, looking across the top of it, I can see a little bit of that corduroy effect, and I'm going to try. What I really see is the grain lines here. But it's the start of a corduroy effect, and the grain lines themselves are more prominent, so the cells are shrunk off in between, like this. And it's probably going to be really hard to show in the camera, but I'm going to give it a crack anyways. So let me get some backlight up here. Now let's bring this over here and take a look at this so we can see the straight edge on the top. Okay, I'm going to get it balanced out on the sides here, much as I can. And you can see that the bridge where my thumb is a high point still. And there's a little bit of a dip right there, but it is not touching the sides yet. And when it touches the sides over here like this, I'm going to bring it down here to show you. If it goes like that, so that that's touching, and you got a dip right there in the middle, then you're going to be dry. But I can still balance this out. So I can still get a gap right there, and I can still get a gap right there. It's hard to balance this and hold the camera at the same time. So this top is not too dry yet, although it is getting drier. Now the other thing we notice here is, let me show you the fingerboard. The fingerboard is a real important thing to check, and this one I felt when I was walking in here with it, and again it's just starting to get bad. Starting to get noticeable. And what you do is you run your hand down the fingerboard here, And you feel those fret ends right there. And if they feel like little railroad tracks, and especially if they're sharp, and especially if they're sticking out, then you're definitely dry. And what I feel here is just part of I feel the frets. And I feel them a little bit more than I really should on this guitar. Definitely more than I did before. You can look here on the edges, and if your guitar is new enough, it's been finished right here, and if you see where the finish is cracked, it's called fret sprout, and you'll see where it pushes the finish out a little bit, then you're definitely getting too dry and the fingerboard is shrunk, the frets are pushing out. A fix to that, of course, is to file them down here, but they shouldn't happen in the first place. In my experience, fret sprout will not correct itself. So if you humidify this board back up again, you're still going to feel some of that. So it'll go back in a little bit, but not much. Now, you want to stop it at this point. So I'm going to humidify this guitar tonight. Tonight it's going to stay here in the shop where I turn the humidity up and it gets up to about 45 or 50%. And it's important to humidify the whole guitar too, not just the body. And the reason is you need to give that fingerboard some humidity. So I'm feeling a little bit of fret. Not bad, not bad, not bad. But it's there, more than it was the beginning of the week. Put this across the top. And we definitely have some more dip happening here. It's not bad. Let's see if we can get that on camera. Gonna move in. Took this straight edge and lay it across here. Right there. And I can definitely see it. Let's get on camera. See that dip right there? At 7, 8, 7 all the way to about 16 inches. And there's a curve right there. And that's the fingerboard, or I'm sorry, that's the top of the guitar caving in, like I told you. That's how acoustic guitars bend. They develop an S-curve on the body right here, so the body goes like this and makes a dip and comes back in. And that's pretty normal. That's really why you need neck resets, is because over time that will distort. But it's possible that dryness might make it distort faster, because as you can see, there's no moisture in the wood, and it might become a little bit more susceptible. Might become a little bit more susceptible to that curving there. So, in any case, our conclusion on this guitar now, learning to read the guitar, is that this guitar is on the verge of getting dry. It's not critical, there's nothing going on, there's no cracks going on. The top seam back here is still nicely settled in. If the guitar stayed in this condition, it'd probably be alright. And I could just come in and file this down a little bit, and it's not even that bad. I just barely feel it. I only feel it because at the beginning of the week, it was super smooth, and now I'm feeling a little bit right there. But you could leave this guitar at this humidity, and it would probably be just fine. But I'm going to bump up the humidity just a little bit more, so I know that this guitar likes to live at about 35% humidity, 35 to 40. It does not, if it gets up to about 50 or 60% humidity, it's going to need neck reset, because the action came up too high, everything swelled up. And so if it was going to live at 50 plus for most of its life, I would want to reset the neck and get me a lower action. So what we've shown here is that your need for a neck reset is sometimes dictated by the amount of humidity that the guitar is in. And when this guitar is just a little bit dry, it's great. And it sounds better too. It sounds dry. Well, it sounds drier. I thought when I pulled it out at the beginning of the reading, I thought it sounded dull. And now it's crispy again, So my conclusion in reading this guitar is that it's good at a little bit lower humidity, 35–40%. Keep it around that range, and there's no need to humidify the heck out of it. There's no need to put 2 sponges in here and keep it up to 50 or 60%. That's too much for it. I do think 25 and 30 is probably getting a little bit low for it. It'd be fine, and the top would probably be okay. But like I said, I'm feeling a little bit more distortion here. There's nothing serious going on there. No cracks starting. But I just kind of feel like I'd be a little bit happier if it had a little bit more humidity. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so I hope I've given you some things on how to learn to read the guitar, rather than just blindly rely on some number on humidity. That number is there in order to keep the guitar in an optimum environment. And an optimum environment might be different depending on when the guitar was made and how well the wood was seasoned and how well this piece of wood absorbs moisture, how well it holds moisture, the geometry of this guitar, and all of these things add up to say, this is the optimum humidity for this guitar, you see. And if you go higher, it's going to become like this. It's going to have a high action. Things are going to swell up. It's going to sound muffled. And if you go too low, you're going to get fret spout. You're going to get corduroy. You're going to get sinking at the top. You're going to get cracks. You're going to get things like that. That's too low. We want to give this guitar a little bit of humidity love tonight. Like I said, I'm going to leave it here in the shop, most likely, and turn the humidifier on and give it some humidity. It'll get 40-45% humidity tonight for 8 hours, and then it'll be fine. So, alrighty. If you got any questions, put them in the comments. And I answer almost all reasonable questions on my deal. So I don't need to do neck reset on this. I was borderline on it. I almost did it midweek, and I thought, nah, it's been at 90 thousandths of an inch for the better part of 2 years, and I think it's going to go back down, and I'm just going to watch it. Got plenty of time to reverse that, Nothing's happened yet. So I just left it alone, and now the action's down to 90 thousandths of an inch, and didn't touch anything. So, we're back to where we started. It doesn't need a neck reset. Just don't need to over-humidify it either. So, see ya.